Hi class, we are starting chapter 2 now, looking at conducting research in psychology. And again, I just want to have a little video introduction to each of the chapters. That's the goal for this semester, is to put this together. First time I've done this, and hopefully this is going over well. In this particular chapter, this is really where psychology distinguishes itself from the pseudosciences, astrology, or certainly it differentiates itself from the arts, from philosophy. This is really what allows a psychologist to provide empirical evidence to support the things we do. It's why I can charge an insurance company as I do cognitive behavioral therapy or EMDR. It is the ability to evaluate what we do through research and provide empirical evidence that our practice can be as effective as other treatments. So, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy has been around for a number of years, and it has proven over and over and over again through research methodology, research studies, that it is as effective as treatment for moderate or mild depression compared to Paxil or Prozac or your psychopharmaceutical interventions. And so this is an important chapter. It can be a little bit dry, it can be a little bit tedious, but it is an important chapter in the sense that it allows us to get really a view of how psychologists move their field forward. You remember I said in chapter 1 that the key goal of psychological inquiry is to describe, explain, and predict behavior. Well, it's based off of research that allows us to do that. And so let's delve into it a little bit. There's some key things that I want you to be focusing on as you go through it. Of course, the text introduces to the common sense and logic associated with it. It describes what science is, that there are different types of science. Psychology falls in the realm of social sciences, and so it has its own kind of distinction in relation, as opposed to mathematics or physics or chemistry. This kind of goes in its own direction. It discussed the scientific method: observing, predicting, testing, interpreting, communicating. It explains why that science is not pseudoscience. It's not like reading the tea leaves or going to your astrologer. Just looking over my notes here in my text as I introduce you to this chapter, it talks about different types of. It introduces you to statistics. Statistics is an interesting course that I teach. I love teaching it. But a part of statistics, there are descriptive statistics, which also includes information for descriptive studies. It's the information that we get back, and then we then describe that information in order to help our audience understand what we are researching and what our results are. Then there is also inferential statistics. So I'm diverging a little bit from the text right now. Inferential statistics is where we make inferences from our statistical analysis based off of our research. That is all examples of quantitative analysis or quantitative research. There's also qualitative research, and that's more descriptive in nature. It addresses hypotheses, but it addresses it in a more of a narrative format. Not that they just disregard statistics, but it's definitely more descriptive. That quantitative analysis is not a key component of it. We also look at, the text talks about correlational studies. These are relationships. Doesn't the key thing is here, it doesn't emphasize causation. Like, for example, there is a lot of research out there that would say that watching violence on TV is correlated with or has a relationship with individuals that act out violently. Albert Bandura, in his observational learning, which you'll see a little bit later on in this semester, spends a lot of time talking about that. And so correlational research talks about that relationship. The key thing is it does not talk about causation. Experimental studies brings us more to that causation, where we can actually control the environment, and from that we're able to determine whether or not a certain type of therapy affects a mental illness. For example, automatic thoughts, changing your automatic thoughts, addressing those automatic thoughts. Does that affect depression? Does that affect anxiety disorders? Those can be done in experimental studies, which allows us to control the environment to a certain extent. There's always error, and in fact, there's always error in almost all type of research, and all type of research. There's always going to be some error. It's going to be less in what they call the hard sciences, like chemistry and physics and mathematics, as opposed to the social sciences, because we've got more variables. We're dealing with people, with humans, and those are factors that we have to take into consideration. They discuss longitudinal studies. These are studies that look at somebody over a long period of time. For example, Bowlby did a study on the changes of personality over time. The very famous film called 7 Up, the 7 Up series, where they looked at children that were age 7, then 14, and 21, and 28, and 35, and now I think they're up to 56. I think the last one was 56 Up, where they look at somebody's how they develop over time. Terman is another one where he did a study on people with high IQs, and he wanted to see their lives evolve over time. These are examples of longitudinal studies, and the reason why you can remember that is the word long. It's a long study. They discuss commonly used measures of psychological research, self-report measures. They touch on the descriptive and inferential statistics. The key thing is that one of the key aspects that they discuss in the chapter, and I introduce the material to you, is ethics. Research in psychology has had a very mired past. They've done some things in the past that were definitely ethically very challenging today. They just didn't have certainly didn't have societal concerns in the 1950s and the 1960s and 1940s, 1930s that we have today, as far as the respect for others, the protection of the individuals that are participating in research. And so there is a strong concern with research ethics, and they do a good job, I think, addressing it near the end of the chapter. They also, of course, talk about the treatment of animals, ethically treating them. And so, guys, that is just a brief introduction into this particular chapter. Again, going back to chapter 1, key goal of psychological inquiry is to describe, explain, and predict behavior. So hopefully this gets you going in that chapter. Again, it's a little bit tedious, but it really is the nuts and bolts of psychology, and that's what distinguishes us from philosophy or the arts. And that's what, again, allows us to really make some changes in people's lives. It's an exciting thing to see somebody who's wrestling with depression, overwhelmed with the despair that one can see when they are in the depths of a deep depression, be able to come out of that with cognitive behavioral therapy, and knowing that we can use that type of therapy based off of empirical research to support the things we do. All right, guys, hopefully the chapter goes well for you. Feel free to, if you have any questions, you can always email me, call me, or Moodle message me. I'll be glad to answer your questions. Thanks a lot.